Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, AJ Mahari.
A couple things before we start this episode. I have a website for this podcast, and it's at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. Interactive website. It's a website is its own feed for the podcast and also for my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to get a lot of the videos that aren't in this podcast, you'd like to check those out, you can do that at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. I would just like to encourage you to please leave a 5-star rating for this podcast if you find it helpful, to help this podcast keep growing and keep reaching more and more people who could benefit from this content. I get a lot of people with BPD rating it at 1 star because, they have all these problems with what I'm saying, and they think it's horrible and disgusting and all that kind of BPD kind of stuff. Now, let's dive into today's episode. In this episode of the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast, I'm going to be talking about the BPD Love Paradox. Why borderlines push away the connection they crave. So people with BPD push away the love that they crave. It's important to note that most people with untreated BPD, or even some treatment, are often not consciously aware of most of what I'm about to break down in this episode. The BPD Love Paradox is very much a product of egosyntonic and alloplastic defenses, along with a major defense mechanism in BPD, which is splitting. People with borderline personality have significant impairments and inability to actually connect in healthy ways. This is tragic. This is very painful for people with BPD and for loved ones, family members, just others in general. This podcast topic is a tender one, a tragic one. Hope it will be an illuminating one, because few things are as bewildering, as painful, as loving someone with BPD who says they want deep connection and pursue it and make it known so quickly and immensely intensely, and yet again and again, over and over again, sort of ad infinitum and unendingly, they will push away the very connection and, quote, love, unquote, that they shower you with and insist that you get involved with them through. And that's the idealization honeymoon phase. And that's when, unfortunately, you weren't meeting who they really are. Not to say that people with BPD are always horrible or through and through awful, but they have relational communication and connection issues big time. I'm going to explore the paradox at the center of BPD. How a person with borderline personality disorder can long for intimacy, attachment, and love, and yet sabotage it the moment it begins to appear and to feel real, to be real. That's too scary for people with BPD. I'll unpack the role of self-fulfilling prophecies, the defense mechanism of splitting, and the tragic compulsive compulsion that people with BPD have to test love until it breaks. Let's dive in. The deep longing and the deep fear of people with BPD. Well, people with BPD often crave love more desperately than most. They ache to be seen, to be held, to be understood, and really, unconsciously, to have somebody meet all the needs that they can't meet because they don't have a self and they don't know who they are. But their inner world is shaped by a fragmented self, identity diffusion, and emotional neglect, perhaps abandonment, perhaps other things. And it tells them, it showed them in early childhood more often than not, that love isn't safe, which becomes all or nothing for people with BPD, because a lot of people with codependency will have childhoods that they learn some similar things in, like that love might not be safe, But the adaptation to that isn't as all or nothing as it is for people with BPD. People with BPD learn that love isn't safe, people can't be trusted, and that love doesn't last, connection doesn't last, attachment doesn't work, it just hurts, and that abandonment is inevitable. They live in a paradox, in an emotional reality and borderline personality that doesn't know and can't find paradox, ironically enough, anywhere. Quote, I want you close, but I'm terrified you'll hurt me if I let you close, unquote. This creates, as I've talked about and I've done a video on, the approach avoidance conflict dynamic in people with borderline personality disorder, which really does render relationships, relating, attachment, connection, healthy love, all of that wonderful stuff impossible for people with BPD. They reach for love, then panic when they get it, don't trust it when they get it, and can't take it in when they get it, and destroy the very intimacy they just worked hard for, immensely overwhelmed you with wanting, and maybe begged you for, or begged for in a way. It's not a game, and it's not just all manipulation. It's a trauma response wrapped in distorted self-perception and identity diffusion, the lack of a known self in people with BPD. Self-fulfilling prophecies, quote, you'll leave me, just wait, unquote. And again, not always thought or acted against by people with BPD in a conscious way. The borderline fear of abandonment is like a ticking time bomb. Even in stable relationships or seemingly stable relationships, marriages that may be lasting quite a while, the person with BPD is constantly scanning for signs that you'll leave. Fear of abandonment. They're looking for rejection before it happens. They're anticipating betrayal. Well, often they're betraying. So they brace for it, preempt it, or provoke it. And here's the painful truth. By accusing, testing, or pushing their partner away, they often cause the very abandonment they feared the most, and again, often unconsciously. This is what we mean by self-fulfilling prophecy. The partner gets exhausted, confused, emotionally worn down, you're losing yourself, by the constant crisis cycles and all the unmet needs and the extreme neediness of most people with BPD. And eventually, partners do leave. Partners do have to leave if they're not left first. Not because they never cared, not because you didn't care or didn't love them, but because they couldn't survive, you couldn't survive. Perhaps you're just coming to find this out now. You couldn't survive the emotional volatility. To the person with BPD, this confirms their cognitive distorted belief. Quote, see, I was right. No one ever stays, unquote. But in reality, it was never fate. It was the result of an unhealed wound acting like a puppet master behind the scenes. That would be the borderline false self. That would be the immature, fragmented parts of a very young, childlike self. Defensive splitting from idealization to devaluation, and rarely, if ever, any significant or real return to re-idealization. So now let's talk about splitting. One of the most common defense mechanisms, the central one in borderline personality disorder. Splitting means seeing others, or yourself, as all good or all bad with no middle ground. At first, the partner is idealized, so you're all good, you're perfect, you're just too good to be true, thinks the borderline. Quote, you're perfect, you get me, you'll never hurt me, unquote. It's intoxicating for both people. But the moment the partner disappoints or triggers insecurity, the switch flips. And it's not that you really trigger the insecurity. It's the trigger within inside the person with BPD that gets tripped, so to speak. You're just being you. You're just being human. But you can't be being the perfect, whatever fantasy illusion of you that the borderline has in the beginning. And then suddenly that trigger goes off in the borderline and suddenly, quote, you're just like everyone else. You never loved me. I hate you, unquote. This emotional whiplash is devastating, not just for the partner, but also for the person with BPD, but they're really not sort of keeping up consciously with what's happening in a really kind of shared reality way. So it's also really painful for the person with BPD who feels betrayed and ashamed after the fact. But I don't know that people with BPD are feeling as much pain in these times and moments and cycles as partners do, or maybe ex-partners do. So people with BPD are not trying to be cruel, more or less, more of them than not. They're trying to survive a perceived emotional threat, which of course they're externalizing that out from their past onto you in the here and now of that triggered split to devaluation, and now you're all bad. And in doing so, they sabotage love again and again. They make consistent, congruent, age-appropriate, quote, love, unquote, impossible. The tragic tests, quote, if you love me, prove it, unquote. And by the way, if you've been trying to prove it, if you know and you're still trying to get them back and you want to prove it some more and prove it again, please know that they're never going to trust what you're proving, and they're not going to see evidence of how you're proving anything because they have this negative lens, and the fear and the distrust and the lack of self takes over everything for people with BPD. So you can keep trying to prove it, but you can't really prove it to a person with BPD, especially untreated. Another pattern at the heart of this sabotage is the compulsive testing of partners, which again isn't always done consciously, but it's usually done nonetheless. Sort of the borderline wondering, quote, will you still love me if I scream at you, unquote. Quote, will you still stay if I threaten to leave you first, unquote. And quote, will you chase me if I ghost you, unquote. And that's not to say that every borderline that ghosts someone wants to be chased, but I think you understand what I'm saying. These tests often stem from early attachment trauma, where love had to be earned, chased, or clung to, or in many cases just wasn't there. It's not about proving love. It's about proving love will survive even in their darkest moments. But these repeated tests wear the partner down and are often abusive. And the other thing, too, is it's about proving love will survive even in the darkest moments. But people with BPD don't believe that, not for a second. They don't trust it. They don't believe it. They will cut you off at the knees. They will disappear. They will discard. They will monkey branch. They will ghost, because no matter how many repeated tests wearing you down may or may not momentarily suffice if you did this or that or the other thing, the real truth is that love can't survive in their darkest moments. Love can't survive in a person with borderline personality disorder's darkest moments, because that dark moment, big emotional overwhelm, emotionally dysregulated, fearing abandonment, moments of engulfment, annihilation anxiety, those are the borderline's darkest moments, and they often don't even know what that is or what's happening, but they just know all that they feel. And then they feel like they have to escape what they're feeling, and they feel like what they're feeling is coming from you or outside of them, and it's not. It's coming from inside. Then they project it out on you. So in the borderline's darkest moments, all of this means that they end up in the protective fear of abandonment or fear of engulfment, annihilation place of now I hate you, a massive devaluation split. So this is why love cannot survive or even continue to exist for them in any small way. They may or may not understand it or know it because they don't trust it. But in the borderline darkest moments, oh no, they're pushing, they're fighting, they're terrorized, they're projecting it out, projective identification. It's all about you. And that's the I hate you part of the hey, but don't leave me. And that's on their side of the fence, not yours. They create emotional instability and eventually destroy the shared fantasy of the illusion of safety of the relationship. And when the partner fails one of these tests, and you always will because you're not perfect and you don't know where they're at with all this inside, even if they're aware of it. Often, like I said, it's unconscious. But so if you fail one of these tests, well, and you will because you're not perfect and because you're human, the borderline internalizes it as proof of your unlovability. But that's not what's in question. People with BPD often, it's a projection again onto you of what's going on inside of them. They think, quote, I knew it. I'm too much. I ruin everything, unquote. And with that shame, the cycle starts all over again. The fragmented self and the fear of being seen. For people with BPD, what underlies all of this? A fragmented sense of self. The person with BPD doesn't have a stable identity to live from or to return to. They often feel empty, unworthy, or unreal. They often have contempt and a lot of hate for self that gets projected out onto a lot of others, including a partner, family members, friends, etc. And when someone gets too close to the person with BPD, really sees them, then people with BPD feel exposed. And again, their whole lens of everything they experience is fairly negative. So that feeling of exposure is going to be the all bad, encompassing feeling that leads them to, yes, feel shame, but they will not be able to withstand that, to be able to stay in a relationship or come back in any meaningful way to make anything work. So paradoxically, even though they long for connection and love, they fear being seen. Because to be seen might mean being rejected for who they truly are. And they don't know who they truly are. And you won't know who they truly are either. And remember, in intimacy, so emotional intimacy, right, of being seen, the word intimacy breaks down to into me see, which means that we have to be able to connect and to cope with being seen, being heard, and with that sort of, quote, exposure, unquote, of who we are in order to be able to love someone else and to be loved by someone else. Borderlines can't do this. And some people with codependency struggle with it to a degree as well, but not the same way as people with BPD. And so the safest thing for people with BPD becomes, and it's a repetition compulsion, by the way, often unconscious, the safest thing for people with BPD becomes destruction. Better to push you away than be abandoned. Better to ruin it than risk feeling too vulnerable. And what's at the heart of that, under that also, is better to be in control than out of control. So take control, get gone, because people with BPD really don't know how to cope with not feeling in control. If you're the partner, or you were the partner, if you're listening and you love someone with BPD, you've likely felt that emotional whiplash, where you may be sort of at the end of the line of it. One moment you're in the center of their world, the next you're accused, discarded, or stonewalled, or ghosted. And you don't know what's going to happen next, but I can tell you that if you go back, if they come back, if you let them back, if you get them back, it's all going to happen all over again. They're going to test again. They're going to, as soon as it starts to feel like maybe things are back on track, they're going to be throwing them off track again. It's all about cyclical want and need, but equally cyclical destruction on the part of people with BPD. And I want to stress, often they're not consciously aware of it. So you're not imagining what you've been going through and what you can't make any sense out of, because it doesn't make sense other than when someone like myself who works with people understands the inside of borderline personality. It doesn't make sense to people who've never heard of it before they end up in this relationship, and or now you're, the relationship's ruptured and you don't know what's going on, or you're on the other side trying to heal. It's really, really incredibly difficult to imagine what you got yourself into when you had no idea. You were just trying to love somebody. This is the heartbreak of trying to love someone trapped in a cycle of fear and defense with no known self. And no amount of proving your love will heal a wound that was never yours or your responsibility to begin with. People with BPD need treatment and plenty of years of it. And short of that, they do not change. They do not age out. They don't go on to the next relationship and everything's hunky-dory. Not at all. They keep repeating these patterns for their lifetimes if they don't get treatment. And if you're the person with BPD, let me just say this for a second. I don't think too many people with BPD listen to this podcast, but if you recognize yourself in these patterns, please know this. You're not broken. You're hurting. It might be fragmented. And your behavior, though damaging, has its origins in pain that wasn't your fault. But it is now your responsibility to get into treatment and to heal. So what wasn't your fault is now your responsibility if you have BPD. Love cannot be safe enough. Love cannot be safe for you if you have BPD until your nervous system is. And that takes a lot of work in therapy. Until you find your lost self. And then you find and know an inner child that can stop believing every relationship will end in abandonment and stop the cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. Until you stop testing love and start trusting it if you have BPD. And that work takes time in therapy and often trauma-informed therapy. It will continue. But you can begin now by noticing when your fear is louder than your truth. But you do need to take that to treatment. So in closing, here's the paradox again. The person with BPD wants love, but doesn't believe they're lovable. They seek connection, but fear annihilation if someone gets too close. They have disorganized attachment. This push-pull isn't manipulation, though at times it can seem or maybe be that. But at base, it's a survival strategy, a survival mechanism. But that doesn't mean that the fact that it hurts others isn't still really important and must be taken into consideration, especially if you're someone who's loved someone with BPD and now you're going through this. But survival isn't the same as intimacy. No, it's quite different, isn't it? Healing means learning that closeness isn't always dangerous and really knowing that. And that love doesn't have to be earned with pain. That you are too much and others are too little. Because that's borderline defensive perception, negative perception, and all they really know with their identity diffusion and whatever their experience was like in childhood. So thank you for listening to this episode. If it touched something in you, I invite you to sit with it, breathe with it, reflect on where you are in the BPD Love Paradox unconscious script. Whether you're the one who sabotages love or the one who's been on the receiving end, there's healing available. But people with codependency have to do their own healing and breaking free of the trauma bond of these relationships. And people with borderline personality disorder have to do their own healing. And really, it's about these relationships don't work out. And it's about each party letting them go and then going on in their own lives to get to heal and to recover. And you don't have to walk through this alone. I'm out here to work with anybody that resonates with me. And until next time, may you find peace beyond the pattern, or start to at least know that you can find peace beyond the pattern. And may you find self-love, if you're someone with codependency who's loved borderline, still maybe all wrapped up in the recycling of the relationship and the on and off and the being totally obsessed with them and still abandoning yourself. May you find your way to healing and recovery and to breaking the trauma bond so that you know that the first love that you need to find as an ex of someone with BPD is self-love, and that doesn't have to hurt, and that down the road then, when you know more about yourself as a person who's wanting to heal codependency, and you individuate more, and you heal from your family of origin, etc., and why you have codependency, then you will be in a space of independence where you'll know much more about your own fear of abandonment, why you self-abandon yourself, how you can go forward after a time of healing, and you can find a love that you truly want and deserve. I hope this was helpful. It's not good news, but it's the honest truth that so many people still trying to make these relationships with people with BPD work really need to not only hear, but really think about, and then know that this isn't a do-it-yourself proposition in healing, and that you'll need to find someone to work with who can truly help you through this. And I'm just one person out here. If you resonate with me, I've been doing this work with people for 35 years, and I have a high success rate of helping people heal from the codependency, breaking the trauma bond, etc. And I also do work with people with borderline personality disorder. And over the years, I've helped many people with BPD to heal and to recover and to be able to find their way to having the relationships a relationship that they've always been seeking and wanting, but to be able to do that in a healthy, mature way from a known self. So whichever side of this you're on, probably most people are, someone who's loved or is still loving someone with BPD, and this is heartbreaking and so confusing. And to you, I promise this much: it won't make sense until you get into your own healing and recovery journey to do your family of origin work and your healing, and to break the trauma bond and heal codependency, because in that process is where you'll find your actual own closure. You're never going to be able to get that from the person with BPD, and none of it's going to continue, all of it, to really not make sense, and that's going to fuel your continued focus on it. You'll continue to want to obsess, not want, but feel the need to obsess and feel the need to ruminate, because you're trying to figure out something that you really can't understand just through trying to figure it out intellectually. You need to do your healing and recovery work, because through that emotional journey and process, then you'll come to an emotional understanding of what happened there. Hope this was helpful, and as always, take care.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.